And welcome back to this Thanksgiving edition of the Still Curtain podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of StillCurtain.com, and joining me today is Shayne Kubas. We are coming off another loss. Unfortunately, the Steelers are now 3-7 on the season. This is not an ideal start. It's not how anybody wanted to be in this situation at this point in the season. Where it feels like everything is lost already. And so now, even if the Steelers win out at this point, they would not be guaranteed to make the playoffs, which is a little bit disheartening. So we're going to preview the Steelers versus Colts game here in a little bit. But first, let's talk about the Steelers game against the Bengals. Shayne, what did you notice from this game? Let's go ahead and kick it off with our winners.
So I think you have to look at the combo of Pat Freiermuth and George Pickens as far as the top receiving targets for this team right now, and I think they really should be moving forward. We've talked about it before where Pickens needed to involve more, and especially Freiermuth needed to involve more as well, and we've seen them do that, and I think it's helped the offense. I think it's a big part of why they scored as many points as they did, even though a lot of that came in the first half. But those two combining with Pickett to form kind of like a trio of guys that he can trust a lot is going to be really important for both Pickett's development and those two developing as they get older as well. It is affecting Deontay Johnson's numbers, and he's kind of been pushed to the side a little bit, which is unfortunate because they paid him. But I think that if those three can get going, Johnson can feed off of those guys too and be more of a complementary guy for them.
Yeah, I would agree with that there. I mean, Pickens almost had a monster game here. Like,
Yeah,
he comes down with that catch there on the sideline late in the game. It's kind of garbage time. I mean, there was like a minute and 54 left, and the Steelers were down 2 scores. That would have given them a fighting chance at least because it was scored there. Maybe you could have gotten the ball back, but I mean, it wouldn't have changed the outcome of the game ultimately. I want to point to TJ Watt on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, this is a guy that you can just point to every game that he plays, really.
Yeah.
And if you're just like a box score checker, you're not going to think that anything was amazing outside of the interception. And let's talk about that pick for a second. How many people in the NFL can do that? How many wide receivers can catch the ball at that point blank range? And he's done it multiple times in his career already. That is one of the most impressive interceptions I think that I've seen all season.
I think that's the thing about it, right? Is it wasn't just that it was like a great play or anything like that, but how many guys could have physically caught the ball? There are just not many guys. Obviously, TJ's a big guy, and I'm sure he has strong hands and everything. Just because he's a pass rusher, he has to have grip strength and all that. But like catching a football is different than just having strong hands. Like you have to have technique. Usually, you have to have a lot of things going for you. And he's an edge rusher, right? He's not catching passes, but we've seen consistently when he gets his hands on the ball, it's very rare that he actually drops it. And he obviously, as an edge rusher, you don't see that often. But catching a ball at point blank range, I know Joe Burrow doesn't have like the strongest arm in the world, but it's point blank range. Like no average person is doing that. No, most NFL players aren't doing that, especially on defense. It was spectacular.
Yeah, his feel for the game is just unreal, and I think that's part of what makes him so special too. And maybe it's his past as a tight end coming into play there a little bit. So we know the guy's got ball skills. Obviously, we've seen that throughout his career, but man, he's just a playmaker. And so, but it wasn't just the pick for Watt. And I know that his stats weren't gaudy in this game, but man, his ability to work off that edge there to demand double teams, it really frees everybody up a little bit. I know Bengals fans are chalking this up, and so did Lyle Collins too. Like, yeah, I held him in check. And so that really wasn't the case. I think that Watt got some nice pressures in this game. He was the highest graded player on the Steelers. And so that's worth noting as well. And it's what we've been accustomed to seeing pretty much throughout his career. So definitely some positives from this game as well as the negatives. I don't think that Kenny Pickett had as bad of a game as someone want to play it out like he did. There were some moments, and I think that, man, if one or two other plays go his way in that game, like if Pickens would have caught that, I think like his 49-yard pass would have been a touchdown right there. Then he had another one that was missed, and I went back and watched that play as well, Shayne. And in that one, George Pickens got turned around, and I think that he looked one direction, and then by the time he flipped back over, he was stumbling. I don't think the pass was as bad as people were making it out to be, especially when you watch it from the All-22. Yes, it looked like he way overshot him. But if Pickens turns his head to the left instead of the right, you're probably looking at another touchdown catch right there. And so I do want to give Pickett some props for that game. Wasn't perfect. Had 2 more plays that were kind of iffy throws, close to interceptions. But I do think that probably that was his best performance overall. And so I would even chalk him down as one of the winners for this game. And like you alluded to already, Pat Freiermuth. And so let's talk about the losers. Shane, who would you consider a loser from the Bengals game?
The whole secondary for the most part. I mean, they just could not handle Higgins, especially. There's too many big plays on, especially that near the end of the game to that Trenton Irwin, who again I looked at my people around me like who. Trent, I've heard of the name, but I was like, is this the guy that's really doing this? Like, first, obviously the touchdown was just a nice play by Burrow, but then on the sideline when Wallace had a chance to get him out of bounds or just tackle him, it just didn't happen. Like, those are plays that you can't afford against a Bengals team that even without Jamar Chase, what they're trying to do. They want to throw the football on you. They're trying to get chunk plays, and they were just able to get too many of them for the offense to stutter like it did. And whenever it sputtered in the second half, they just couldn't keep up because the defense just kept getting beat on the big plays.
Yeah, there's so much blame to pass around here. And it's funny because I've heard a couple of different narratives spun after this loss. And everybody's like, well, the offense is responsible for this game because they put up a dud in the second half. And that's mostly true. They did. But I mean, how could we not point a large portion of the blame to the defense when you're giving up 37 points in this game when you were at home for your second consecutive game coming off a bye? And so I think that the pass defense was horrible. And it was from not just the cornerbacks, but the linebackers as well. I mean, here's a bizarre stat for you is all 3 of Pittsburgh's top all off-ball linebackers, Devin Bush, Miles Jack, Robert Spillane, they each gave up a touchdown to Samaje Perine in this game. Perine had the trifecta there. He had the hat trick, and they each allowed a receiving touchdown to him. They were terrible in coverage. I went back and watched that game, and I was just shaking my head looking at these guys. They were so late getting out to these swing passes that the play was already past them by the time they got out there. And so they've got so much work to do when it comes to their linebacker groups, when it comes to their corners. Like between their off-ball linebackers and their corners, they might have one guy that's worth starting next year, and that's Cam Sutton. And outside of that, I don't know who else should even be on this roster, let alone even have a spot starting for the Steelers. And so that's something that it really needs to be addressed moving forward. The linebackers they have invested in just hasn't worked out. The corners they haven't invested in, and obviously it's not working out. And so you want to see that turn around drastically. All right, Shane, where must the Steelers improve immediately?
I think immediately, for one thing, you have to figure out a better coverage scheme than what you're throwing out there right now. There's too many times where I see Levi Wallace one-on-one with guys. He's just not a man corner. He isn't. I think he has good zone instincts. I think he can make plays on the football. We've seen that. He does have a couple splash plays as far as turnovers, things like that. But with a guy like him, and the problem is the speed, right? We don't have any speed at corner. And whenever you don't have speed at corner, it's just there's not that many good matchups you can get one-on-one. And obviously technique can have a play in that. And like when Wallace is able to get guys to the line and keep them from stacking him, like he's not terrible. But again, it's just not that hard for a player with even above average speed at wide receiver. If they get a good release on these guys, they can't keep up with them. And I understand like that's the defense. They're going to run the defense how it is. But you're going to give up chunk plays, even with Watt back. Like, I don't care how much pressure he's getting. If the quarterback knows, okay, I just need to basically 2 or 3 step drop and lob it up to this guy because he's going to have 3-4 yards of separation, you can't get to the quarterback that fast. You just can't. Not even TJ can. So that needs to change immediately. I think offensively, you need to keep up with what you're doing with getting the ball to Pickens more and Freiermuth more. Clearly, it's just worked better than anything else they've tried this year. And if you can, get a couple big plays of Deontay going, get his confidence back up, and make him somebody that is actually able to be targeted effectively and not just, what is, I think, like 5 yards target right now, something crazy like that might be around that range. Like
it's low.
It's low. It needs to come up a little bit for him as well.
Yeah. Speaking of Johnson, I mean, I was doing a little bit of research on how down this season really is for him right now. Last year, he was averaging 4.9 yards after the catch per reception. This year, it's down to 1.9 after the catch per reception. And I don't think he's being utilized to the maximum of his skill set. Now, in the minimum opportunities that he's gotten this year after the catch, he's made some questionable decisions with those back jukes and trying to, extend the play a little bit and try to make something out of nothing. And it hasn't gone in his favor. But overall, we've seen throughout the course of his career, he's a slippery guy. If you get him the ball in space, he can almost always make that first guy miss and get some positive yardage out of that. So it's a shame the way he's been utilized. And it's just not, just nothing. You can look at every statistic across the board, advanced or otherwise. This shows that he's just one of the least efficient starting receivers in the NFL this year, and it's too bad. Even though he's got the furthest depth of target he's had in his career at 10 yards, he's only averaging 8.9 yards a reception, and that's just some very replaceable level stuff right there. It's not $18 million worth of production that you're getting out of Johnson, and I don't think all of it's his fault. Obviously, he deserves the blame for some of that. But if you're asking where we need to improve, I think that is one area specifically. I do like the target distribution. I'm not going to lie. Yeah. I really like the fact that Pickett is targeting Freiermuth and Pickens heavily, because I do believe that those are going to be the two best pass catchers on this team for a while now. But Johnson can at least be a quality number 2 receiver. And the fact that he's putting up like these just dismal numbers. This is like Ray McLeod level stuff for the Steelers last year. It's got to go up. He's got to get more efficient, and Canada and Pickett need to find a way to get him involved a little bit more often. All right, give us a player of the game real quick, Shane, and then we'll move on to our next topic.
I think it's tough because offensively, there's a bunch of players who had really good games, and so you could look at Pickens. He had the big touchdown. You could look at, honestly, even though again people are going to talk negatively about the performance somewhat, Pickett had his, like you said, maybe his best game overall. It's definitely a tale of two halves situation, so I hesitate to give him player of the game. Cam Hayward had a really disruptive day, but again, he had rookie on him like he did the first game, and that obviously just didn't work out too well. For me, it's hard. You could say Pat. He had 8 catches, 80 yards, and he was that consistent chain mover for them. I think that he was really a big part of it. I don't want to give it on anybody on defense, even though TJ, he had a great game, but when you give up 37 points, you can't really say it's that. I think ultimately I would honestly have to say Pickens. I think watching what he did, obviously that last play would have made it clear that he was player of the game, but he was getting open. He was making effective plays, and that touchdown was a really nice route for him too, which is nice to see.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said there. As much as I'd like to give it to Watt, because I don't think that Watt was the reason why the defense
not at all
37 points. But when your defense is giving up 37 points and you're not getting to the quarterback often enough, I think they took down Burrow just twice. Then I'm going to give it to somebody on offense as well. I'm going to go a little bit obscure here, and I'm going to go with James Daniels. And I think just because I think he's been one of the most consistent players for the Steelers this year on either side of the ball. He's grading out as one of the best pass protectors this year. And if you go back and watch the film and in the All-22, it's not too hard to see why. Steelers offensive tackles, I thought, were pretty terrible in this game.
They were
against Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard. And I kind of expected that. I wrote about that prior to the game. And so I wasn't thrown off guard by that. But I want to give James Daniels some love here. And especially considering that I think I would have given this to Pickens had he just secured that last catch there, attacked on another 49 yards and a touchdown to his already pretty good game. And I think he did have another catch that was brought back with a penalty or something else there as well. But he's just, the guy is brilliant on the sidelines. And as a 21-year-old, he's pretty impressive at what he does. But we'll give this one to James Daniels for his consistency in pass protection and another solid game here. All right, let's move on to our next topic, Shane. This, like we said at the beginning here, it kind of feels like a lost season. And it doesn't surprise us at this point, because we've seen the struggles coming. Like we've seen this team they rank low in pretty much every category across the board. And so if you're looking at the Steelers just on paper, you would say, yeah, this is probably one of the worst teams in the league this year. Unfortunately, they were able to bring that disgusting point total that was, I think it was like 14.3 offensive points just before the bye. It's up to 17 points now. So with that 30-point game, but it's nothing to write home about. That's still good for 28th in the NFL. And they're just not there. 3-7. If they drop this, they're out of it. Even if they win out, like we said, it's possible they can win out and still miss the playoffs here. And so let's talk about what to root for this year moving forward, because this is uncharted territory for us. We're not familiar with the Steelers football team that is this bad. And so I think the first thing that fans should be rooting for, and I think this goes over top of wins or anything else, is we need to see progress from Kenny Pickett. I think that is the key there, Shane. So I'll let you kick that off.
That's what it's all about at the end of the day, right? You draft a quarterback in the first round, he gets on the field. It's got to be, what does he show you right now? what does he show you that he can do in the future, hopefully with maybe better players around him. And you have to figure out what do we need to do as well to get the most out of this guy. And I think from what we've seen so far, especially in this game, we've seen flashes of him making very, very good plays. In this game, especially, I mean, some of the throws to Pickens, it's Pickens and to Freiermuth, especially some of the stuff late in plays as he's running up instead of just taking off like he's been lately. He's firing it into zones. It's that type of stuff is what he needs to continue to do more of, especially over the middle of the field. We harped on it all season. That's starting to become less of an issue, which is good to see for sure. I'm not sure how much of that is Canada and how much is just Pickett saying, I need to target the middle of the field. But in general, like what he shows the rest of this year and what then you can do with him moving forward, that's priority number one. And I think looking at this game, obviously the second half was rough for a good part of it. It really wasn't until the end of it, whenever they were getting the garbage time touchdown, that he started to come back alive. But he showed more flashes by far in this game than he's shown at any other point this year.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I just wrote an article on that and the traits that he did show in this game. Loved a couple of those dimes down the field. Probably my favorite play of the game though is, I think it was a 3rd and 8. And instead of rolling out or moving backwards in the pocket, Pickett stepped right up, gave himself the option to potentially run. And then when the defense closed in on him, he was able to find a receiver to convert that.
Yeah.
And so those are things that you love to see. Stepping up in the pocket, scrambling around, making some of those plays. He had the one to Freiermuth, the one where Pat broke like 2 or 3 tackles there. That was an excellent play as well. And so definitely starting to see some of those traits that you want. Again, Pickett's never going to have the Mahomes or the Josh Allen arm strength. That's just not his game. But I do think that he's got a little bit of Tony Romo-esque skills to his game where he can extend that play. He can make some things happen there. And that's what you want to see. And you want to see him do well under pressure as well. I think this is the big one. We just saw just today, Zach Wilson, and this is Wednesday when we're recording this, Zach Wilson was benched from the New York Jets because he just wasn't performing. Quarterbacks are on a shorter leash than they've ever been before. You have to win now, and especially the way the contracts work out. You don't want to waste these years of young receivers and young players on rookie deals if your quarterback isn't cutting it. And so we want to see Pickett continue to trend the right direction. I do think that no matter what, he's given a longer leash than what Zach Wilson has been given. Obviously, it only made it a season and a half through, and that was with injuries weighing him down a little bit as well. And so obviously we don't want to see that come to fruition with Pickett. We do see some positive traits there. And I will note that in this game against the Bengals, when he was blitzed, Pickett had a passer rating of 155.8. That is very encouraging. That's nearly a perfect passer rating. And so we want to see more of that moving forward. Pickett does have, I just saw, the second easiest schedule remaining for quarterbacks on the season. And so maybe he can give himself kind of a boost of confidence there heading into the 2023 offseason. But I do think that is the number one thing that fans should be rooting for right now, even over wins, is we need to see Pickett take that next step. We need to see him become that franchise quarterback for this team. All right. The next thing that I think that we need to see, Shane, is for the defense to put this all together here. And it's for a couple of different reasons. First of all, I think the defense has been just average this year. Even in the 2 games that TJ Watt has played, or 3 games that TJ Watt has played now, it hasn't been spectacular. He's had some good moments there. And again, I'm not blaming Watt for that. I think that Watt is a great player, but the defense in general needs to be better. And the biggest reason that I have for that, Shane, is I don't want the Steelers to have to invest another first-round pick on defense this year. They've done it so often in the past, with the exception of Pickett. I mean, they do it essentially every year. 2014 was Ryan Shazier, 2015, Bud Dupree, 2016, Artie Burns, 2017 was Watt, 2018 was Edmonds, 2019 they traded their first round pick to get Minkah Fitzpatrick. 2020, who do we got? 2020 that was their pick. 2019 was Bush. 2020 was the first round pick for Minkah. And so it's like every single year, one after the next, they're investing this much in defense. The defense needs to play better. I don't want them to invest their first round pick in defense next year, unless I'm getting Will Anderson or Jalen Carter. I mean, those are like my 2 only exceptions because those are generational prospects. I think the Steelers desperately need to draft an offensive tackle. They need to address the trenches more. And so I don't want them to be pigeonholed into spending a pick on a cornerback or heaven forbid, a linebacker, because I don't value that heavily enough to do that early in the draft. If we're doing that with one of our second round picks or a third round pick, that's a little bit different. But I do think that it's important that this defense shows something before the season is over.
Yeah, I think my concern here is like for them to pull it together. Realistically, the back end has to play better. So obviously, you like what you have at safety. That's not really going to be a problem. The corners and really the linebackers, like you said already, like those are the weak points of this team, and they have been for a while now. And obviously, I don't see that changing significantly before the end of the year. I mean, you hope that one or two of these guys that haven't played very well maybe show you something to convince yourself that okay, maybe they can be placeholders if nothing else. But right now, like pretty much everybody, like you said, except for Cam Sutton, there's no one here where you have say they have to come back next year. They have to be a starter next year. And that's just not good enough for a team that wants to hang its hat on defense, especially as they rebuild this offense and they're trying to figure out, what do we need to do around Pickett to make that good. They can't really afford, if they want to also still be good, for the defense to have this many flaws in it. And outside of their front four and the very back end of the defense, there's really not a lot to write home about talent wise or performance wise.
No, it's not. And as I've alluded to in the past, I really think that this is a stud and dud defense with not enough studs to carry the duds all around. And so
Mm-hmm.
they have to do something there. I do worry about spending that very early pick, which we're looking at right now. If it stands today, is the 8th overall pick in the draft. Could be higher, could be a little bit lower. I can't see it being a lot lower with the way that the Steelers have performed this year. But I really think that they need to make sure their number one priority, in my opinion, should be to make sure that Kenny Pickett succeeds no matter what. And so you have to get him some sort of help. I disagree with what some other teams around the league have done. If you look at like Jacksonville, even spending high picks on the defensive side of the ball, when you've got a young, promising quarterback like Trevor Lawrence, you need to make sure that he is one of the most well-protected quarterbacks in the league. You need to make sure that he has every weapon. And so they've spent a lot of money, but I want to make sure the Steelers are spending their capital the right way. This doesn't mean that I'm opposed to drafting a great cornerback prospect like Akili Ringo. It just means that I want to make sure that Pickett succeeds. And I want part of that to happen is the defense needs to show that they can be a good unit by the end of this year. And so maybe the Steelers can spend mid-round picks on that or second-round picks on the defense. But I really want to make sure that the investments are going into the offense and that Pickett gets every chance that he's able to. Last thing here that I think that fans, this is a super controversial one and it depends on who you ask, but I think that more and more fans are becoming on board with this, Shane, and I want to know what you think about that. But should we actively be rooting for the Steelers to lose football games at this point? This is a 3-7 team. If they fall to the Colts, we're looking at a 3-8 team who's lost to some pretty bad opponents. And what is there to root for at that point? And so I'll start with you, Shane. Do you think that is something that we should be rooting for the sake of the future of this team? Or should we just kind of let it play out? Should we be rooting for wins still?
So I think it's tough anytime you're a fan and you don't have any way to get into the playoff race, right? Like it's realistic. Like realistically, even if we went out, you've already mentioned a couple times, we have no guarantee that we're going to get a chance to make it in. And if we do, this is not a team has any better chance to make it anywhere than last year's team did, right? So at some point, you have to sit there and go, as a fan, should I want this team because I'm a fan of them and I know it's best for their future? Should I want them to still play well, but not well enough to win? And I think that's kind of the line is I want to see this team continue to get better than it's been, but in a way that doesn't sacrifice their immediate future or their long-term future, right? Because if this team goes on a run and they finish 9-8 or 10-7, we all know it's going to happen. Even with the new GM in place and like Weidl, those guys in the front office, they're going to think, oh, we figured something out at the end of last year. Let's continue just to build on that. Let's maybe trade some of our picks that we have to get established players. Like that's the type of stuff that teams will do when they find that they can win in this scenario, right? Well, they look at this team and go, oh, well, this team isn't even that good. We just need to add a few pieces to it. We're good. That's not where we're at, whether they believe so or not. And if they go, like I said, 8-9, 9-8, that's probably the direction we're going to move. I'd rather finish 5-12 and feel good about some of the players that we're developing, hopefully, than finish 7-10 or 8-9 and be like, oh, well, we had a really good back half of the season, but now we have the 18th pick in the draft. And, who are we going to take, right? Like, I'd rather be in that situation than that. And it's tough as a fan because you don't want to sit there and say, oh, I want my team to lose. I don't want the Steelers to lose, but they're probably going to anyway. I'd rather them just keep doing that if it's going to help them more in the future.
Yeah, and if you look around the rosters in the NFL right now, I mean, the Steelers are probably one of the top 2 or 3 teams that you say this team desperately needs to rebuild.
Yeah.
They've got some older players, they're lacking talent, and they've only got really a few players that are worth mentioning. Like you got your top tier players, your Watt, Hayward, Minka, and then your up and coming players. There's not nearly enough of them. You've got like Pickens, Freiermuth, Highsmith. Who else are we pointing to outside of that? Like, I wouldn't consider like Cam Sutton a developmental player anymore at this point. He's more than halfway through his career. And so you are, I mean, that next tier right there, they're just desperately lacking talent there. And so they've got to right the ship the correct way. They cannot just try to, again, keep their head above water and run it back yet another year, because that's what the Steelers have done the past 2 or 3 years, and it's not working. And you can see the downward trend just happening every year. And so I agree with you. I think that the worst thing that could probably happen to the Steelers this year is if they finish like 8 or 9 or 9-8 in the unlikeliest of circumstances, meaning that they would only win or only lose another game or 2 for the rest of the season. I don't see it happening. But if that were to be the case, they probably would fool themselves into thinking we can run it back and we can be a competitive enough team that we'll give ourselves a shot at the playoffs. And that's just not the right way to go about it, because again, we predicted that last year, if the Steelers did sneak into the playoffs, and they did, they were going to get humiliated. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, they were just embarrassed by the Chiefs. And so they're not anywhere near that level where where I could even believe that they can be a good enough team to have that 3 or 4 game run into the playoffs, into the Super Bowl, to be a legitimate contender. It's just not going to happen in their current state. And so should we be rooting for losses? I don't know. It's hard to, I agree with you. It's hard to actively root for them to lose when the game is going on. I still haven't done that. I want to see them succeed. No. I want to see them do well. But I thoroughly believe that for the best interest of their future in the state of this team, it is in their best interest that they lose every game from here on out. Because, and I was writing this just as well, and I've got an article coming out this weekend. If the Steelers wind up with a top 4 pick, I think that's the best case scenario for them. The best case scenario, because there's going to be teams that are going to want to grab one of those quarterbacks at the top of the draft, I believe. And I think that your worst case scenario in that situation is you can grab a Will Anderson or you can grab a Jalen Carter, 2 generational type prospects, the 2 best prospects in this draft, not necessarily at the biggest positions of need, but that is your worst case scenario. Best case scenario is you own a top 4 pick and you are able to trade out of that for a king's ransom. And I can pick up another 1st round pick this year and a 2nd round pick next year, or whatever it ends up being. And then you really set yourself up for success, like Andy Weidl did in recent years with the Eagles. And so that's what I would love to be able to see. You're not getting that option if you're picking pick 8 or pick 10 or pick 12. You're going to sit there more likely than not, and you're just going to take the best player on the board, whether that you think that that's a cornerback or whatever else, but that's what you're getting at that point. And so that is the difference. You're looking at it at the end of the year and we're saying, man, we'll probably be thinking to ourselves, I really, really wish Steelers would have lost this so-and-so game or that game, because it makes that big of a difference in terms of setting yourself up for success in the future. And I really think that that's what's most important for the Steelers at this point. All right, we're going to shift gears here. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you would like to support the Steel Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all your support. All right, Shane, let's talk Steelers versus Colts for a few minutes here. The Steelers are underdogs in this game, not surprisingly. I mean, they've been underdogs for nearly every game that they've played in this year. And so they started off as 3-point underdogs. That line has since shifted to 2.5 points. I think that if this was at home, it would probably be a pick 'em for the Steelers. I mean, it's probably just up to your decision there for odds makers. They are underdogs though. However, in Indianapolis in Week 12 for Monday Night Football, what do you make of that line?
It makes sense because even with the Colts head coach situation, which hasn't been, at least on the field, that big of an issue at all, I think it's more about just the fact that this Colts defense is legit. They're very, very good. Even with everything going around them on offense, like they have stepped up to the challenge to keep this team at least in somewhat, competition here. But if we were playing a team that had more of a stronger offense and a weaker defense, I think that's our best, recipe to actually have a good chance of winning. This is tough just because even though the offense has played better the past 2 weeks, this is their toughest test they've gotten in those weeks as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is a defense that allowed 17 points to the Eagles last week, one of the best teams in football. And it required every single second of that. Essentially, the Eagles scored right at the end of the game. And so they really hung tough in there. So for a team that averages 17 points like the Steelers, it's hard to believe that they'll be able to put up one of those 30-pointers again this week. I would not expect a shootout. I would 100% expect a slugfest between these two teams. We'll get to our predictions here in just a second. So I do think that line is fair. I think that both teams are probably going to have a low-scoring game this week. And so we'll see what the outcome is going to be there. Let's talk Steelers injuries for just a second here. Nothing major. However, it's definitely worth noting that Jaylen Warren was injured very early in that game, left with a hamstring. Tomlin doesn't believe that it's a severe injury, but we'll check his status this week to see if he's going to be available. Steelers playing Monday night, and so he gets that extra day of rest. And the other big one is Mason Cole with a foot injury. Tomlin seemed to be pretty optimistic that he would come back, that he would be available for this game. And so we'll check on his status during the injury reports this week. No Chris Boswell still, as he sits on IR. He needs to sit out, I believe, another 2 games before he's eligible to come back. And so the Steelers missing their former Pro Bowl kicker, hoping to get him back at some point. What do you make of the injuries this week?
I said nothing that's super concerning. I mean, not having Warren, if he's not able to go, would definitely be a bit of an issue just because you'd like to be able to get Harris some snaps off. And he's the best guy to do that, of course, on the roster right now. Outside of that, I mean, we knew Boz wasn't going to probably play, so that's nothing new. Cole, I do hope he can go. He has been very good when he's been healthy, which fortunately he has dealt with some nagging injuries, it feels like, all year. So hopefully he's good to go. But again, because a lot of these are on offense, the offense already has an uphill battle. So I'm not sure how much it affects things ultimately, at least not anything more than it already has been. So.
Yeah, I do think you lose a little bit of explosion if Warren doesn't play.
Right.
Najee has two back-to-back pretty good
Yes,
games.
he does.
And so I think that's good. I do think that a player like Warren would really come in handy against a team like the Colts. And so I can't see Najee having as successful of a game this week. And if he does, then I'll probably end up being impressed by it. But the Colts defense is pretty stout. They did a good job against the Eagles. And so we'll see what happens this week. Again, nothing major on the injury front. Which again, it's both positive and negative. It's the Steelers have, outside of TJ Watt, they've really been one of the healthiest teams in the league for most of this year. And right now, I mean, they're as healthy as they've been all season, essentially, not missing anybody major outside of Boswell. And so you want to see them be able to step up to the plate there. Let's talk about matchups to watch real quick this week. I want to highlight Hayward against Quentin Nelson. Quentin Nelson, as you probably know, is all-pro guard. I don't think he's played as well this year as he's had in the years past, but another all-pro against all-pro matchup here. So I'm interested to see who gets the best in that one. I want to talk about Pickens against Stephon Gilmore. Gilmore's primarily on that side as the right cornerback, and that's typically where Pickens lines up as well. Pickens coming off some pretty good games. Gilmore has been pretty solid here this year, and so that matchup it's going to be intriguing. I want to see who gets the best of that. Is there anything else that you want to highlight, or do you want to touch on any of these?
I think the Steelers' interior offensive line versus Forrest Buckner of the world, and that whole Colts front four, because they've been phenomenal at stopping the run, especially on a per carry basis. They're second in the league in yards per attempt allowed right now, 3.8. They need to win some of those matchups. They have to be able to run the ball consistently. You don't have to put the ball in the air too often, especially against a guy like Gilmore, who's always been able to make plays in the football. They have to be balanced, and we've seen that with the Steelers team when they've been able to run the football consistently, especially not on just the third and long handoffs to just get 7 or 8 yards on them, but first and second down runs that are successful. That's what they have to be able to do, and it's not a great matchup for that, unfortunately. So that's something I want to watch to see.
Yeah, I want to see some encouraging signs from this offensive line, but I'm a little bit doubtful that we'll see the performance that we want, just because this Colts defense has been playing so well recently. And so that's definitely something to watch there. Let's go ahead and talk about our keys to victory here. And Shane, I'll let you kick this one off first.
I think like I kind of just feeds into what I was talking about, but you have to be able to run the ball effectively because this is a team that is not allowed teams to do that. It puts them in bad passing situations, which helps their back end, which isn't really that talented outside of Gilmore. Like you have to be able to stay on schedule because that's what Canada Artie is going to try to do regardless. So if that's what he wants to do, you have to actually do it, right? You can't run the ball in 1st and 10 and get 1 yard. You can't run it on 2nd and long constantly, expect to be successful. You have to put yourself in manageable 3rd downs where you can take advantage of some of the other guys on the Colts defense that aren't as stout against the pass. And you have to be able to protect Pickett whenever he does have to, if there is going to be bad passing situations, because there's going to be some, you have to protect him and give him chances to find Pickens down the field or find Freiermuth over the middle. Like that has to be the number one thing is the offensive line has to get push and prevent their pass rush from affecting Pickett early in games, especially early in downs, I should say.
Yeah, I'll look at the other side of the ball even because I just expect a poor offensive outing.
You have to assume, yeah.
You'd have to assume that, I know. And so I hope that's not the case. Like if you can lock us in for 20 points, I would take that because I just don't see it happening this week against this defense. So I'll look at the other side of the ball and say the Steelers absolutely need to be able to stop the run and Jonathan Taylor. And so, and most teams have been able to do a pretty good job containing him this year. But the Steelers have to do it this week or else it's probably going to be all she wrote because I'm not too worried about Matt Ryan in the passing game. I think that'll be a big improvement from what it was against Joe Burrow last week. But if they're able to have their way with the Steelers, control the clock and run the football, I don't give Steelers much of a chance in this one because I think that'll lead to points for the Colts, but also the Steelers, like we alluded to, are probably going to struggle pretty heavily on offense this week as well. And so I think in order to have success, they're really going to have to contain the running game. All right, Shane, let's go ahead and give our predictions today before we sign off for the Thanksgiving holiday. And I'll go ahead and go first this time. Okay. I've got the Steelers. I was too optimistic last week, Shane. I got a little bit giddy. And I know that that Saints game, I know how many players that they were missing in that game.
Yeah.
I was a little bit encouraged by Sa. I didn't read too much into it, but I did think I had a gut feeling the Steelers could pull off that Bengals game. They weren't able to do it. I didn't foresee the defense giving up 37 points. And therein lies the problem right there. I thought the defense would give up like 20 to 23 points last week at most. I think I predicted the Steelers winning like a 20-17 game. I thought that they would be a lot tougher than they were, and they weren't. So this week, I'm kind of going the opposite direction with this. I do have the Steelers losing this game on the road in Monday Night Football in a very low-scoring game. I have the Colts winning 17-13, and I'll kind of be a little bit surprised if the Steelers are able to do much more than that offensively, though I do expect a much better defensive performance by the Steelers this week.
So I'm in the same similar vein there. I have 2017. I have the Colts winning. I think that ultimately the problem is, and we've talked about it, can this team score 20 points against a top 10-ish, even maybe 5-ish defense, depending on how you look at the Colts right now? The Colts are coming off 2 really good defensive performances back-to-back against offenses that are better than us. They just are at this point, especially at this point in the season. Could we score more than this? It's possible. If you look at what we did last week, if you can replicate some of that and get some of those big plays, then sure. But it's just going to be hard because, again, like you said, I think that they're going to have the running game really try to control things. It's going to limit opportunities for the Steelers to have the ball. And, yeah, maybe Matt Ryan isn't playing that well this year, but I think on this pass defense we have right now, if he gets a couple big plays to Pittman or whoever it may be, that might be all they need to get, like you said, 20 points, and that's probably all they need to get to.
Yeah, so Shane and I both predicting losses this week. That would have the Steelers dropping to 3-8 on the season. It'd be the worst that Mike Tomlin's ever had to start the season in his career, and it already has been. And so not an ideal season. We'll see if they can turn that around or if we want them to. But it'll be interesting to see what happens. At least we get to watch the Steelers in some primetime football, and so that's always something to look forward to there. All right, we're going to sign off for today. Thank you for joining us today on the show. You can follow Shane on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Still Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcast. Also, check us out on YouTube. Happy Thanksgiving, and thanks for listening to the Still Curtain podcast.